The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you one of the most extraordinary, joyous turnarounds of any orchestral song cycle. The uncertainties, tragedies, mystery, and lonely yearning of the previous songs have melted away, and a glorious outburst of triumphant, majestic color and energy rushes in to fill the space. Structurally, this song represents a fulcrum point balanced on the key of F, relative major to the general trend of the opening song's D minor tonality, and gateway to the coming groupings of C and G major songs and dances. As you might guess, such an explosively exuberant piece of music would be accompanied by appropriately celebratory lyrics, and once again, the ancient text of Carmina Burana delivers. This time with the poem Ecce Gratum, Behold the Welcome. The welcome spoken of here is that of the oncoming spring and the promise of summer. Each stanza describes a state of change for the better, ever increasing in optimism and anticipation. The beginning invites us to behold the blossoms of the meadow and the calming sun, and how sorrows give way in the face of springtime. After this, the poet underlines the disappearance of winter's hardships, and likens spring to an infant nourished by the oncoming summertime. Notice how this middle verse, just like the beginning, finishes with a four-line saying like an adage or proverb, in this case deploring those who will not give in to the enticements of summer. This all leads up to a literal glorification of those who surrender to the pursuit of romance, premio cupidinus, the gifts of Cupid. The final lines are more of a creed than a proverb, vowing fealty to Venus, the poet comparing himself and his fellow supplicants to the mythical Paris, who surrendered the choices of wisdom or worldly power in exchange for the affections of Helen, the most beautiful woman in history. And this just brings us back to the Goliards who authored these poems in Carmina Burana. I'd say that this text, above all others, sums up their worldview: to celebrate earthly pleasures in the pursuit of emotional and sensual gratification, not crudely, but with all the intelligence, good humor, and passionate sincerity that they could bring to the task. This is Carmina Burana's first song that brings feasting to mind, though it mentions no food other than symbolically. The way that Carl Orff sets it, it really sounds like the beginning of a terrific medieval party, with flagons of wine overflowing, roast haunches of venison heaped up on platters, and toothsome loaves of bread hot out of the oven. Like other songs we've looked at, the text has a specific structure and rhythm, 2 short lines of 4 syllables each, followed by a longer line of 7 syllables. This pattern is repeated in the next 3 lines. Then, of the 4-line proverbs that complete each stanza, the first line, in each case a very strong statement, also consists of 7 syllables, followed by once again a 4-4-7 pattern. As we dig into our analysis of this song, you'll see how Orff closely interprets the dramatic pacing of these verses, and expands them to almost unbelievably grandiose proportions. And with that orientation, let's waste no more time and go straight to the score. On this opening screen, we see almost the entire constituents who will be playing this work. Triple winds with no auxiliaries except for contrabassoon. The standard 4 horns, triple trumpets and trombones, with bass trombone sharing the staff with first and second, and no tuba. Timpani, though not shown here, nor 1 or 2 other assorted percussion instruments, we'll get to those later, and all of the bell-like percussion available to Orff, glockenspiel, tubular bells, celesta, and both pianos. And of course the strings. But let's start our bar-by-bar analysis with the choir, the tenors singing solely in the huge opening declamatory bar of 4 brevs duration, marked con ampiezza, translated as with breadth. It's a simple motif, like a nursery song, each pitch accented and yet at a piano rather than forte dynamic, for now. Counterintuitively, the framing around this bold but restrained statement is forceful. Unison pianos striking stacked octaves plus fifths at fortissimo, their right-hand part doubled by glockenspiel, the lowest note of their left-hand part reinforced by tubular bells. A lone first trombone hits the downbeat with a forte piano accent, adding punch at first, and then just a hanging soft note exaggerating the effect of the bell percussion sustain. Now the song can really start, with tenors building on that motif, repeating it quasi-staccato at a quasi-allegretto pace. These simple pitches are placed right inside the passaggio of a typical choir tenor's tessitura, the first note of F at the top and then the answering C at the bottom of the mix between registers. Below, the basses harmonize in very simple fifths and thirds, maintaining the childlike thematic simplicity. The upper voices also within their typical mixed range. Accompanying the choir with an understated but nevertheless effective punctuation, the pianos play a paced type of figuration in a sticky half-pedaled pattern that surrounds the central melodic doubling. Glockenspiel joins in with this groove, striking a top octave F like a bell on the first 3 downbeats, supported at the opposite end of the pitch range by pizzicato basses on low F. And this time second trombone repeating the previous tone from the first bar inside the middle of the sound picture. Muted divisi cellos and violas provide a pianissimo cushion of F major harmony spread over 3 octaves, the top octave of which is brought forward slightly by the bassoons. Ecce Gratum et octavum reducit gaudia. The serene texture of that little phrase is now amplified with greater radiance, simply by stacking its elements upon one another, starting with the upper voices replicating the same material as the lower voices an octave higher, with the same lyrics and essential relationships of pitches across each relevant tessitura. The result is a lovely, bright, but not strained sound, easier to control at the different dynamic levels it will be repeated, as we'll soon see in the next verses. The pianos jump everything up an octave, except for those downbeat left-hand chords, putting their melodic doubling up where it can guide the sopranos. The celesta takes over repeated octaves from glockenspiel, which, in turn, plays a version of the choir's little chorale. With so much support on the downbeat, stacked flutes over muted trumpets also support the chorale joining in on the second beat each time. That leaves the much broader cushion behind all this, double basses turning their pizzicato low F into one solid arco tie, while muted violins pile on the same exact chordal scheme from below onto the top note of the violas, so that the chord now stretches across a full 4 octaves, 5 if you count that low bass note. Orff is very selective in how he assigns winds on top of this harmonic pad, with bassoons doubling the low F5 of the cellos, contrabassoon in unison with second bassoon. On top of this, he scores a cool triple octave of clarinets, with first and third trombones continuing on their F drone in the middle. The result is actually a very subtle, somewhat undefinable texture that floats behind the choir, flutes, trumpets, and pianos, especially when the soft tishing of suspended cymbal is factored in. Now that the choir has welcomed in springtime, they turn to describing the purple flowers spreading across the meadow under the calming sunshine, in the most picturesque manner, with a flowing octave line that starts on the tonic F, climbs up to a very comfortable D for all voices, and then back down, dipping below to the next D before returning back to the original F. Once again, Orff walks the line between striking, artistic lyricism and a very folk-like melodic innocence. I love the indication in Italian, smoothly and quite loosely, to guide the singers away from a kind of tortured precision, and toward a very casual expression of wonder. Note that he's slurred each syllable across a pair of ascending or descending pitches on the one hand, and added an encompassing slur over the whole phrase on the other, really emphasizing the legato quality for the choir. This wonderfully generous line is supported by those same triple octave clarinets, crowned by sweetly glowing celesta octaves. Duo pianos continue the pacing with alternating F and G major chords, keeping the harmonic information from becoming too static, and even changing the function of some melodic notes to passing tones in context. Hanging over it all, the cushion continues outlining an F major pad, strings just the same as before across 5 octaves, with flutes doubling first violins this time, trumpets doubling second violins, contrabassoon in unison with double basses at rock bottom, and bassoon spread out across an octave and a fifth above that. At pianissimo, all 3 trombones maintain their drone, which is not the easiest thing in the world for bass trombone at that dynamic and that level of pitch, but still doable for a pro. Bookending the whole phrase is a little ting by glockenspiel and tisch from cymbal at the start, and that little bite of lowest and highest F octaves from pianos. Let's listen to this whole screen once again, with all these phrases in order. Pay special attention to how well the meaning of the words fits the gradually unfolding musical tone painting. From an opening proclamation to a plainly stated profession of joy, repeated and intensified, and then giving way to a wonderfully graceful setting of the text. Also be aware that the background harmony is both calming on the one hand, like the warmth of the sun in the text, but also anticipatory of the merriment to come in the next section. Orff takes us immediately from a filled-in texture and supple melody to a bombastic, almost brutal thumping and blasting around in the next phrase, which embodies the meaning and spirit of the final proclamation of each stanza. In this first case, that the sorrows of winter must give way to the return of springtime. The orchestration here may be stripped down to only 5 elements, but it's nonetheless powerfully effective. Tenors and basses in melodic thirds, both in a very bright, secure, and even chummy register where dramatic emotion can be effortlessly stagey. An octave higher, first and third horns expand this to a rousing, throaty bluster, beautifully underlining the theatrics of the male choir. But what I find most effective here are the basic elements of accompaniment, pounding out alternating 1s and 5s in the timpani, placed rather high on the smaller kettles for a very resonant ping, and a mere octave above, triple unison oboes honking away in their low register, the very picture of a consort of shawms raving it up at a medieval wingding. This is one of those moments where Orff calls back the listener to an echo of ancient timbral qualities, and the optimization of a register that's often considered problematic by modern orchestrators is enormously satisfying. Though the restatement here is grandiose, even splendiferous, its strategy is merely that which we saw on the previous screen. Expand the sound picture by stacking the same elements as before on top of one another. And of course, turning things up to a rollicking fortissimo. First, for the harmonized melody, adding the upper choir on the same pitches an octave higher. Then violins and flutes yet another octave above that. Second and fourth horns play what appears to be a basic driving accompaniment, back and forth between written E thirds and Gs below, probably intended to be a due. But the reality is that they also support the melody most of the time, as those thirds, sounding down a fifth, double the sopranos and altos nearly every other beat. You can see a similar function, to a degree, in the quadruple-stopped violas and cellos, the top two pitches of each adding emphasis to the harmonized melody as well, in rhythmically strategic moments. The freshly minted accompaniment elements are more intriguing, even when simplistic, like alternating octave staccatos and third clarinet, and grunty unison bassoons fattening double basses. But the more intricate elements are what add the most excitement. A staccato pattern of broken F6 chords in duo pianos, and a furiously rippling staccato ostinato based on the opening motif of FCDC, but sped up to 8 times as fast, and 5 times as intense with triple unison oboes and octave first and second clarinets. Just add a little tambourine to the emphasized rhythm, and the impression of a glorious celebration is complete. On the next screen, Orff introduces a bit of a party game, alternating back and forth between both of the previous settings as the singers exchange the two fragments of verse, the bombastic horns, timpani, lower choir, and honking triple oboes, beefed up by third trumpet, trading off with the rowdy, fully scored partying with a punch in the middle. This is brought to a close by the final line of verse, that winter has completed its term of service, in a roaring combination of choir and heavy brass, trumpets supporting the upper choir and trombones the lower, along with some punctuation from timpani and tubular bells. All that's left is a carousing coda, with the choir stacked in octaves and fifths exactly like the strings before them on the syllable of ah, with once again the trumpets supporting above and the trombones below, and the horns throwing in the context of a major chord with their sounding A third. Notice that here's a spot where both upper horns probably should be sharing the top written G, and both lower horns the written E sounding A below. But as I've mentioned before, this irregularity is no big deal, and actually a nice little variation of roles to throw in from time to time. I find the low isolated contrabassoons bottom F and the high tremolo C of the glockenspiel charming. Risky, but effective. Of course, few listeners will really be focusing on those extreme ends of the pitch spectrum with all the rampant figuration running wild across the page. Pianos playing interlocking quadruple octaves in a kind of inversion of the opening motif, with winds doubling positions, from triple unison flutes and first clarinet above, to triple oboes and second and third clarinet in the middle, all the way down to a due bassoons on the bottom. This creates a kind of swirling, riotous sound that the average ear can barely parse, especially with the timpani thumping out the same motif pattern that the oboes and clarinets introduced on the previous screen, and tambourine rustling along with a dominating roll. A splash of cymbal pair at the outset, continued emphasis from multiple stopped strings, and a reaching upwards of winds, glockenspiel, and piano preceding a concluding tutti hit at the end, and then the whole song is ready to reset back to the beginning. As we'll see in several other songs in Carmina Burana, Orff more or less repeats the material verbatim for the following verses, which is not a bad thing if the orchestration and the drama are compelling enough, and you want each song to get stuck in the mind of the broadest possible audience. But those considerations aside, it's probably more true to the spirit of the original text to go back to the top and do it all over again the same way for each verse. That doesn't mean that it's an out-and-out repeat. Orff amps up the beginning of each subsequent verse, first with the tenors at forte instead of piano, and then with all male singers fortissimo. Other progressively stronger dynamics are assigned to the first few phrases of each verse, as is a more piercing doubling of the quadruple piano's top line by piccolo at the end of verses 2 and 3. A savvy conductor will allow the tubular bells to ring out after the final tutti chords cut off, to really underline the sense of celebration and victory over the passing winter. Let's listen to those last two verses now along to the score. Then stay posted for the start of the next section, Auf dem Anger, in which outdoor dancing, partying, and unabashed flirtation abounds in the burgeoning medieval meadows. That's all coming soon. See you then.